Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. A peaceful protest interrupted by a despotic state or an act of environmental extremism that put lives at risk. The description of Greenpeace's recent action in the Barents Sea depends on where one stands politically, but regardless of how you call it, can it actually achieve its proclaimed goal, that is, putting an end to oil and gas drilling in the Arctic? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Kumi Naidu, the Executive Director of Greenpeace International. Mr. Naidu, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
In the media, all the 28 Greenpeace activists plus the two freelancers who accompanied them were sort of lumped together under the hashtag Arctic 30. But if you look at their actions in legal terms, I think they were quite different. Some of them were on board of the Arctic Sunrise, others were trying to scale the platform, and yet some others were actually trying to ram the boat of Coast Guards. Do you personally differentiate between their actions? Do you think they should be treated differently in legal terms and in terms of the charges that were leveled against them?
Firstly, if you look at a slow motion picture of what the Russian Coast Guard released of the incident, if you look at it properly, there's absolutely no basis to say that our activists tried to ram the Coast Guard boats. We were unarmed. The Coast Guards had knives and shot weapons at us. We had our hands up in the air. There was absolutely no effort on our part to ram the boats. But however, on your question about should they be treated separately, definitely the two journalists should be treated separately because they are not Greenpeace employees or activists and so on. They were there to do their job as journalists, and that's why I said those two should be released immediately in the interest of media freedom and so on. With regard to the other activists, yes, you're right. People played different roles. And at the moment, you know, as the president of the Human Rights Council in Russia has suggested, Medvedev, that charging Greenpeace of piracy, the Russian authorities should just as well have charged Greenpeace of trying to gang rape the oil platform because it's such a ridiculous charge, and President Putin agrees that we are not pirates.
Mr. Naidu, President Putin did express his opinion, but he is a private citizen, and I don't think that his opinion should be paramount to everything else in this country. But coming back to that issue of ramming the boat, we're actually showing that video at the moment, and you can see that one of your boats was actively trying to push the Coast Guard boat away from the platform. We cannot hear what those people are discussing, but it is clear that it wasn't a collision. It was an intentional pushing of the Coast Guard boat away from the platform. And we can argue whether that constituted piracy or not. I'm not a legal expert, but I think some lawyers here in Russia suggested that that could actually constitute an assault on the lives and safety of those officials. And that charge in itself carries a much longer sentence in Russia. It could be punished by a prison sentence from 12 years up to life in prison. And I would like to ask you, do you think those activists had the right to actively prevent Coast Guards from doing what they were supposed to do?
Okay, let me say very straightforward. I participated in exactly the same peaceful action at the same rig 1 year ago. That rig sits in the middle of an ocean. Around the rig, because there's this massive concrete monstrosity there, there are several swells that are actually exaggerated. I myself, when I climbed up last year, when the Coast Guard was there, by the way, the Gazprom security were abusing the Coast Guard personnel, saying they should arrest us and so on. And the Coast Guard saw that we were peaceful, doing exactly the same actions that we had planned to do this year. They observed us for 3 days, and they saw that we were not a threat to either person or property and didn't arrest us. But if you look at the swells around how the boat rises, that was the absolute control you have about how you can maneuver in a swell is actually difficult. And I myself actually fell off last year briefly as a result of the swell. So I'm not seeing your image, unfortunately, on the television. But see, one of the things about Greenpeace is that the words green and peace are equally important. Yes, we do take very strong, peaceful action, but we do not cross the line beyond any action that can be termed as an attack.
That's precisely the case in point here. I know that you've been arguing all along that the protest was entirely peaceful, and yet from the footage that we got, there is an intention, there is an act of aggression. You can see that. You can argue whether it was violence or not, but there's an intent to push the Coast Guard away from the platform. And if something like that, for example, if you had a peaceful protest in, let's say, in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House, and if some of your activists were in a vehicle actively trying to push a police car away, you would be not only detained, but you would be most likely charged with the assault on the police, and you would most likely be convicted. So it's not much different here. Obviously, the environment is much more dangerous, but it is clear from the footage that those people weren't just drifting in the direction of the police, of the Coast Guard boat. They were actively pushing it away. And that's what makes this protest different from the last one in which you participated. Well,
let me tell you that I have seen, I'm not seeing your version that you are showing on television. I have seen exactly what the Coast Guard put out. I've seen a slow-timed version of it, because when that allegation was made, I took it very seriously, because if we did, in fact, do what you say we did, that we consciously tried to ram the Coast Guard's vessel, instead of what I am saying, from what I looked at it, it was control of the boat that's brought about by swells, then I would take a very negative view of it, because that's against the policy of Greenpeace. But my view of the slow motion picture that we did is that it's not as you presented, but I'm afraid I'm in a studio where I don't see your version of the recording and how you're presenting it.
I'm sure that footage will be part of the evidence that will be brought up in the courtroom. Now, let's move away from the piracy charges. I know that there has been a lot of discussion, and I have to say that some lawyers say that this particular incident of ramming the Coast Guard boat is what constitutes piracy, but obviously it could be debated. Now, what about other charges that could be brought against your colleagues? Because some suggested that there could be charges of hooliganism, which also carries a prison sentence in Russia. There could be charges of trespassing that could be brought up against your colleagues. What do you think about those charges? And if your colleagues are found guilty of those charges, will you accept that in stride? Will you agree with that some of the laws have been violated?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure whether you read my letter to President Putin that I sent last week.
I surely did.
In the letter, I said to President Putin that Greenpeace never considers itself above the law. That there's numerous cases where when there have been peaceful actions and where there have been charges of trespass and so on, we have, even when our activists have gone home to their home countries, they always come back and face those charges. So what I said was reasonable charges that are proportional to the action that was taken is absolutely fine. However, if you want to talk about illegality, understand that there is an action being brought by the Dutch government against the Russian government in the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention Tribunal, because the Arctic Sunrise, the ship, was actually out in international waters, not in the 500-meter exclusion zone.
And Mr. Naidu, we will have to wait and see until that court proceedings begin, and indeed until they finish, to make any judgments on whether or not that act was illegal or not, just as we have to wait and see for the Russian proceedings to begin, because there have been a lot of judgments passed.
Similarly, you need to wait and not rush to judgment about ramming and so on, because that has not been.
But this is something that you can see from the footage. This is for that you don't need to have a legal expertise, obviously, to have a judgment on whether or not you were in international waters or in territorial waters. I'm not an expert on that, but I have my set of eyes, and I can see that there is a clear intent in the movement of that boat, and it was continuing.
No intent. There's absolutely no intent, ma'am, for on any Greenpeace activist anywhere in the world to engage in any form of violence of any, because when you say ramming, that is a very serious allegation.
Intentionally pushing and interfering with the actions of the Coast Guard officials. And this is a crime in this country, whether you like it or not.
Well, let's see. There will be debates about that footage in court. And because we have a different interpretation using scientific slow motion to show actually the impact of the swell and so on, whether there was an active intention. There clearly wasn't. And as you say, let's wait for the court on the tribunal. I say let's see how the interpretation of what you are saying, because it's very interesting in the way some of the media have reported. For example, clearly there's a massive attempt to smear Greenpeace that's happening. Let's be very clear about it. For example, if you look at the language that was used about the so-called drugs allegation, it wasn't presented as it was suspected. It was as if there were drugs on board, and the drug of morphine.
Mr. Naidu, but I think Russia can make a similar case. I think there is many Russian officials, at least, see it as a smear campaign against Russia. And to be honest, I think some of your previous statements by Greenpeace were very vitriolic and really tried to utilize these anti-Russian attitudes that are prevalent in the West. But let's not trade allegations.
You've made a serious allegation. Okay. You've made a serious allegation there. Can I respond to that?
Ahead.
You are saying that Greenpeace is anti-Russian? That is ridiculous.
No, I think it uses a lot of typical Russian stereotypes. And many of your colleagues said, I heard them saying, you know the Russian courts, the Russian jails, how people are treated there, what these activists will be subjected to. These are Russian stereotypes, and these court proceedings haven't even started. Those people are treated like everybody else in this country. They have access to lawyers, they have access to their consular workers, and so on. They're not being treated any differently than anyone would be treated under those circumstances.
I have not seen a single statement. I invite you to actually share that or send it to me where such statements were made.
That was yeah, I will absolutely send it to you, and I encourage our viewers to go and to the YouTube and see for the conversation that you had with Mr. Ben Alif and a couple of other guys in the Google Hangout just a couple of days ago. And I think the presence of this anti-Russian stigma and judging Russia before those court proceedings even began is very evident there. But
excuse me, why don't you accuse President Putin of judging before the court case starts? Because President Putin has also said that these piracy charges are ridiculous. Why don't you also make the judgment about Mr. Medvedev, the president of the Human Rights Council?
Private citizen. He was expressing his private opinion, and I would like to discuss that issue with you after the break. But before we go there, can I just go to the heart of the matter? Because I think this whole debate about the fate of the activists is really distracting from the main issue here, and this is the fate of the Arctic. And I think that also goes to the heart of Greenpeace action. Do you guys actually have been able to achieve what you supposedly tried to achieve? That is to attract attention to the drilling, to the prospect of drilling in the Arctic, because it seems to me that we are all now, the whole world is discussing the fate of your colleagues rather than really focusing on the main issue at hand, which is whether or not we should drill in the Arctic.
You are right to a certain extent that, in fact, the disproportionate response of the Russian government, the Russian authorities, to this peaceful action has put a fair amount of focus on the human rights question. However, I must say that in all the work that I've done probably about 200 interviews since this has started, and all of them I'm reminding people that why this is important is that the Arctic serves as a refrigerator and a conditioner of the planet and plays a key role in climate regulation. This part of the world has unique biodiversity that is almost certainly going to be lost if Arctic drilling goes ahead. And thirdly, if there is an oil spill in this part of the world, Gazprom has not provided an oil spill response plan, but all the experts in the world, this has never
hasn't even started drilling yet. So let's be fair on Gazprom. It hasn't even started its operations. But Mr. Naidu, we have to take a short break now. But when we come back, Russia is often criticized for being an authoritarian state with too much power concentrated in the hands of just one man. So why would Greenpeace appeal to Vladimir Putin for the release of its activists before allowing the legal process to run its natural course. That's coming up in a few moments on Worlds Apart. Welcome back to Worlds Apart, where we are discussing the plight of detained Greenpeace activists with the organization's executive director, Kumi Naidu. Mr. Naidu, you mentioned it several times that earlier this month you wrote an open letter to the Russian President Vladimir Putin in which you offered him to, quote, move your life to Russia and act as a guarantor for the good conduct of the activists if they are indeed released on bail. It does sound a bit like a hostage exchange, don't you think so?
No, basically, the 2 months that our colleagues are spending in prison now is called pre-trial detention. As the activists against the apartheid system, when we were arrested without actually the trial being started, before the charges were brought, which the apartheid regime did regularly, we simply called it detention without trial. In my letter
you're
to
comparing
President
Russia
Putin,
to an apartheid regime now? Is it the correct meaning of what you're saying?
No. I am talking about this is detention without trial. My letter to President Putin was not saying, don't charge our activists. My letter was seeking bail for our activists and saying that they will stay in Russia until the trial is done, and we are prepared to follow the legal process if reasonable charges were brought, and we are prepared to face reasonable charges. In terms of public opinion, if you got the head of the Human Rights Commission, yes, you can say he's a private citizen. You got the president of Russia, you can say he's a private citizen. But these are two very significant
Mr. Naidu, you know that this country, Russia, is often criticized for authoritarianism, and despite the fact that constitutionally, at least, we have 3 different branches of the government, you know, there are a lot of critics who say that too much power is concentrated in the hands of Vladimir Putin. I wonder, why would you pander to those alleged authoritarian tendencies by calling on Putin to intervene in the legal process? Because we don't need Vladimir Putin to tell the courts what to do. The courts, I hope you would respect the integrity of the Russian courts. They can do that by themselves.
Tell me, did you see the statement
Absolutely,
of
I read
the
it several
president
times.
of the Human Rights Council, who said the authorities that are bringing this action should be charged and they should actually sponsor 3 tours of the Bolshoi Ballet around the world to compensate for this crazy decision that they've made, right? That is the kind of sentiment that's in Russia at the moment. What we are saying is that we agree with that. International legal opinion agrees with that. Our reading of Russian law agrees with that sentiment that bringing piracy charges is completely nonsensical and completely disproportionate for the peaceful action that was taken.
But that may well be. I mean, I agree with you, actually, and President Putin seems to agree with you, but I don't understand why, as one of the tactics, you would actually call on him to intervene in the legal process without even allowing it to take due course. I mean, why not wait till trial takes place and all those charges are dismissed, or, you know, obviously the prosecutors will have to prove them. Why not? Why to have so little regard for the legal system in this country?
Because as a 15-year-old, when I entered the struggle for justice, I have always held the view that detaining people without a trial starting is an unjust thing. You arrest them, you charge them, you allow them to be with their families, prepare the defense, and when the court case comes, to hold them in jail before they are found guilty is detention without trial.
But pre-trial detention is part of the Russian legal system. I'm sure before you decided to have this action, you must have studied the Russian law. I mean, I've read many of the letters written by your activists from the jail, and they said that we were ready for the risks that we were taking. So if you studied the Russian legal system, this is something that you were supposed to expect. And I have to mention that it's not just Russia that has pre-trial detentions. Pretty much every single country in the world has it.
No. Please don't lie. Not every single country in the world has it, but you're right. Russia is not the only country that has it. And just to be clear, Russia is not the only country that is actually causing havoc in the Arctic. I want to say very, very clearly, we have been consistent in our resistance to all those countries and companies, whether they be Western, whether they be Russian, whether they be anywhere in the world, if you are going to start drilling in the Arctic, where in fact we have a situation, if there's an oil spill at the end of the summer months, the oil will be locked for 6 months in the ocean, causing devastating damage to the environment, to the biodiversity, but also having a negative economic impact.
Mr. Naidu, I totally agree with you on that point, but I wonder if this recent Russian scandal represents everything that is wrong with the Greenpeace strategy, because as you pointed out, we mentioned already Vladimir Putin, and he's the man who really tried to polish his environmental credentials. I don't know whether you are aware of that or not, but he invested a lot of money as the president in the cleanup of the Arctic. He really tried to profess his affinity for environmental causes. And Russia is, of course, is a very important Arctic country. We have the longest Arctic coastline. So if you found a more constructive way to engage with Russia, including its president, you may have had a major breakthrough in your campaign to safeguard the Arctic. But instead, you chose this particular publicity stunt that put your people in jail, and that may have destroyed all the goodwill that you could have received from the Russian authorities, and including the Russian president, on this particular issue.
Well, let me just say that what is at stake here is huge. It's not an issue that affects one country or one part of the world. We are talking about averting catastrophic climate change. We are talking about 1 day after our activists were charged with the ridiculous accusation of piracy, what we had was the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've said 75% of known fossil fuel reserves, oil, coal, and gas reserves, need to stay in the ground, or stay in the ocean, or stay wherever they are, even if we know where they are, if we are to avert catastrophic climate change.
But Mr. Naidu, I think what you're saying is that the goal justifies the means. And again, I agree with you on the need to protect the Arctic. My question to you is different: whether the means that Greenpeace chose are appropriate for the goals, because I think that, again, we are misplacing the priorities here. We all agree that there should be a debate on how to protect the Arctic, but it seems that the protests like these that you're having, you had in Russia and in some other countries, are not producing any meaningful debate on this particular issue.
You and I are having a debate now, and I hope the Russian people will see this, and this is a debate we might not otherwise be having, by the way. But in any case, you are asking, do we use other tactics other than peaceful civil disobedience? So let me tell you, last year, before I participated in the action in the rig, I went to Moscow. I met with the Minister of Environment and 3 other ministers. We presented our concerns. We had a cordial, constructive 1.5 hour meeting. In that meeting, we presented reports on that was done by the think tank on modeling potential oil spills and what would happen. We presented that report to the minister.
So here you go. You had constructive dialogue in place. Why did you need to go and have this public stunt and launch those legal proceedings that we have underway now?
That is because there is such a big gap of from intention and reality. We then have to, when the science is telling us we are running out of time, ensure that appropriate, additional, peaceful pressure is brought to bear to get our governments to understand that what we are compromising here and what we are risking is not something simply called the planet. This struggle is about securing our children and grandchildren's future. In the last decade, apart from what the science is telling us, in the last decade, we have seen a 10% increase in extreme weather events, including some in Russia, by the way, that is telling us very clearly that climate change is not something that's going to happen tomorrow.
Mr. Naidu, nobody here in Russia or in the studio is disputing the effects of the climate change. Again, I think the focus is on the tactics and how productive they are. But let me pose you the last question. It's been reported that due to the scale of the environmental challenge that the planet faces now, Greenpeace is about to change its tactics a little bit and focus attention from lobbying and dialogue with corporations more towards direct action, like the one that we saw at the Prirazlomne Rig. And moreover, it's been reported that you want to shift your resources from the developed world towards emerging countries that are now also going to the forefront of industrial development, countries like China, countries like Brazil, India, and so on. Do you think there is a risk that this Russian case may set a precedent in the world for how to deal with Greenpeace in the future? Because I think Greenpeace is used to getting nothing more than a slap on the wrist from the developed countries.
Well, firstly, on the tactics question, just to be clear for your viewers, of the work that Greenpeace does now, not even 20% of our work is peaceful, non-violent direct actions. Not even 20%. Most of our work is scientific, it's lobbying, it's research.
Yeah, but it's direct actions that get the most attention, I guess.
Well, listen, this is nothing new. It's what delivered liberation for my people in South Africa. It's what delivered an end to slavery, the right for women to vote. Yes, people always did lobbying and negotiations, but all of those struggles add peaceful, non-violent resistance to push our governments to act. But let me just say, as far as Brazil goes, one of those countries, the president of Brazil has made a very clear call, calling for the release of the Arctic 30, including one of the Brazilian activists that is there. So if I look at some of the countries that you refer to, but why is it important for us to put emphasis on the emerging countries, is that these countries must not make the mistake that the Western developed countries did in building their economies in a way that destroyed environment and created the problem of climate change.
Well, Mr. Naidu, this is all we have time for. Thank you for taking time to talk to us. And if you like the show, please join us again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.